So many NFT games have been dropping in 2022, and 2023 has a whole slate of different NFT games and Web3 games that are slated to come out and look really fantastic. There's a lot of large AAA titles, a lot of really interesting beta tests that have come out in 22 and things like that. And how does Illuvium shape up amongst the pack? A couple of key examples that I've played are things like the Red Village, Taunt Battle World. There's the Star Atlas dogfighting game that I haven't played. Some of the Axie Infinity land setups have come out, as well as things like Metalcore, which I did play and I actually really enjoyed. There's some really interesting titles coming out. A lot of them are using asset packs and it really shows. So I'm hoping Illuvium can break itself away from the pack in that sense, but there is so much going on that we need to really break down Illuvium once more. So I've been playing both the overworld private beta as well as the survival mode private beta, and I just wanted to go through my updated review score and what Illuvium needs to take its gameplay and its mechanics to the next level. And I'm just going to simply talk about my personal opinions, how I feel about the game at the moment, and if I've been enjoying it or not. All right, so this is going to be a really big video, really awesome review. I hope you guys enjoy it. It's going to be really good stuff. So we'll start off with the Illuvium survival mode. So I'm going to go over 3 really key topics here: strategy depth, cinematic feeling, since that's important to Illuvium, and retention. So starting off with strategy depth, obviously it's got some really deep strategy and gameplay, and the PvP will only enhance that. So I really do love the strategy side of things, and I think it can be a little bit counterintuitive to try and dragging in the masses, but they've already made big steps from PV1 to PV2, so I'm looking forward to the future, and if they make it more or less difficult, because I think it's at about the right difficulty now, and I wouldn't really like to see it get more complex, but PvP will be a different structure altogether, so I'm eager to see what they come up with. The other thing is that you need to learn each aspect of the game to master it, but you don't need to learn each individual aspect to just enjoy the game in itself. And I actually really love this as a feature. You can match up the synergies, that's probably the baseline one. Positioning is probably where you start to get more advanced, and then your augments is where you're starting to get to that higher level gameplay where your augments can really mean life and death, especially in those later waves of survival mode. The deeper alluvial pool would also really help. I find that with the current set of alluvials, or necessarily the current balancing in the set of alluvials, that some alluvials seem to be really strong and some synergies seem to be really strong, while other synergies are just lagging behind. And the ability to not be able to choose what goes in your deck is certainly making the game a little bit of a less fun experience. And I'm hoping that as the pool of alluvials grow and it connects to the overworld and things like that, the retention and the deepness of this gameplay is going to become a much more profound and a bit less dated so quickly. I feel like since the deck is randomized each day, you don't really get the chance to test out what you want to test. And then if it's a deck that doesn't suit your playstyle, for example, I love fire and I love earth, then you don't really feel like playing for the day. And obviously it's not going to be like that when the game comes out, but I think it's worth noting that that can hurt the retention a bit, is making it a little bit harder to test for people like myself at least. So the next thing I want to talk about is the cinematic feeling. Now, the step up from PV1 to PV2 wasn't super noticeable, but things like the Ramfire Omega changing actually had a really big impact for me. It is a really fantastic game. Cinematically, and the way you can move the camera around, you can zoom in and it's all high fidelity, high quality. It's really something, and it's something that we haven't really seen in the gaming industry pretty much ever before. In terms of auto battles being cinematic, I'm not just talking auto chess, I mean anything automatic, even things like standard PvP games from a game that isn't a shooter always doesn't feel very cinematic at all. Things like League of Legends or even things like World of Warcraft. The graphics are customized to work on lower end PCs. And I feel like even the lower tier graphics, when you drop down on your settings, in Illuvium feels really great. And I've heard from people that their computers can still run it just fine. So it's really interesting, and it just definitely feels like a little bit like you're watching a movie. And I think it's something powerful that Illuvium has going for it. I can't wait to see it keep progressing as the Omegas get more interesting and we get more alluvials as well. The last thing we need to talk about with the Illuvium survival mode is the retention. It's a little bit hard to stay engaged when you don't have a real opponent. When you're battling against an AI, especially when you're trying to speed run it through because you just want to get to those higher tier, those later waves, it can feel a bit lackluster, and it does start to get really repetitive when you're playing day in and day out. That's why a lot of people aren't playing it super actively at the moment. It's also really hard to stay engaged with a random deck. Now, there is the thing to say where if you put in the same fire deck every single time, you'd probably get bored and that'd probably get repetitive as well. But I'm not convinced. I think there's definitely a means to say that if you can bring in your your own deck, then you can also mix and match it out and things like that. And you can also choose alluvials that you're comfortable with and learn them better. And then maybe when you're really happy with that, you might go and learn something else. So I think the randomness in the deck definitely doesn't lend itself to it too much. The next thing we need to talk about is the Illuvium overworld, okay? I've been playing this relentlessly. I play it every single day, make sure to do at least one stage 3 run, depending on how much time I have. Sometimes I'll do a couple more than that. And I'm really loving streaming it as well. I feel like chatting to people and kind of like having those moments where you found an alluvial that you were really looking for. It's actually really memorable. And when this game takes us to the next level, it's going to be even better. So I think it's got a lot more streaming qualities than I thought it was going to have. And that's definitely a big advantage. So the 4 key things I'm going to evaluate the overworld on is the core gameplay loop, game graphics, the jankiness of the game, because it's very important to me personally. I know not everyone cares about it, and the overall engagement, similar to retention from the survival mode. So the core loop is excellent, all right? I know a lot of people say it feels boring and things like that. If you take all the stuff out, if you take out the repetitiveness of a single region or the map is the same every time and things like that, the gameplay loop itself is really, really good. It really helps drive the pack opening feeling of the overworld, which is what the overworld is striving to be. And it's locked in that feeling of opening up a pack of cards and trying to get the best possible cards you can. When you start to add holographics and stat variations and things like that, I think it's going to get even deeper. But at the moment, I think it's really, really good and it engages with that. However, things like alluvials not being able to level up and how small the alluvial pool feels could be a bit impactful. And I actually see this getting worse before it gets better. What I'm saying is currently all the alluvials are in Crimson Waste. But as soon as we go to 3 regions, let's say primarily fire, primarily nature, Brightland Steppes, and primarily water in Abyssal Basin, I feel like this pool is going to get really, really small. You're going to be finding mostly atlases because it's really the only tier 1 water alluvial in Abyssal Basin. And I don't know how much they're going to engage with that. All of these little lynxes and things like that will help. But if you're going into every battle and you're finding the exact same thing every time, that could cause some problems. So that does make me nervous about the pack opening nature of this thing. But I think like the harvesting and all that sort of stuff does kind of help out a bit as well. So it's going to be interesting. The next thing we'll talk about the game graphics. Now, the graphics are pretty phenomenal and all the assets feel unique, which is something you don't get in gameplay so much nowadays. Cyberpunk did it really well. Skyrim did it really, really well. And so did things like The Witcher 3. That did it excellently. Obviously, I've compared 3 of the biggest RPGs in the world, but they all had environments that felt unique, which is something that is a little bit unheard of nowadays. Actually, World of Warcraft did it quite well as well. But a lot of people copied World of Warcraft and then their environments didn't feel as unique. Illuvium has done a really, really good job with the uniqueness of Crimson Wastes. Although it doesn't feel massively diverse, and that's a problem for me, the entire map feels orange. And I know that that's the point of Crimson Wastes. It still doesn't feel too great. I feel like day and night cycles would have a big impact, especially if the plants change slightly. If it was at nighttime, they glow in the dark or something like that. And maybe the sand looked like a slightly different color because it was night. The sun made everything glow up even more red or something like that. Just a diversity in the region in some capacity, I think is very necessary. But I feel like Crimson Waste is the one that's going to suffer most from this anyway, so it's probably not a big deal. But it does feel like the region itself is telling a story. Now, that is something I haven't had in a video game in a very long time. And even though there's no lore, you go through this map and you feel like every single part of the region is not only unique, but is telling you a story. There's the area with all the crystals. You're like, how do these crystals form? I know alluvials like to spawn in here. Why do they light up? It's all connected. There's electricity in the cavern next to me. Is that linking up to the crystals? Is this entire thing filled with an electromagnetic field? It feels like it's telling you a story. And if they can capture that with every single region in Illuvium, it's going to have a really big impact on the memorability of your gameplay and your enjoyment. And that's going to take the game and the franchise a very long way, especially as they start to enter massively multiplayer online territory and things like that, of course. The next thing we'll talk about is the jankiness of the game. So this is one of the smoothest game experiences I've ever had. It's not perfect, but the way you smoothly transition from jumping, jump pack, jetpack, and all the rest of it, and that all the movements feel intentional. Like when you land and your knees slightly bend because you're landing on a hard surface after a really big jump or something like that. It all feels really intentional. I think that's really important. But even the way the character turns and the momentum, and you can really feel the impact sometimes the jetpack and the jumping and everything doesn't feel too heavy, but it does when you're landing. So it's almost there, and the fact that she brushes away plants and things when you walk past them is a really important feature and something that too many games are missing. There's not much clipping and stuff in the environments as well. So overall jankiness is pretty much perfect, to be honest. So the last thing we'll talk about is the overall engagement of the overworld. So I really, as I said before, I really love playing the gameplay loop every single day, and I actually feel really attached to the alluvials I capture, and I actually really enjoy the resource grind as well. The harder it is for me to craft that later gear or that later tier gear, I don't think gating the jump pack to tier 0 is the right decision. I'm talking about things like your drone equipment, things like that. I feel like grinding for that sort of stuff is actually really, really cool. And I'm really liking the way the loop is working. It might take you a little bit too long to harvest that stuff. And maybe it doesn't really push you to engage with alluvials in every single time you enter the overworld, which is its own concern that I have with the game. But I actually really, really love how grindy that side of things is and how attached I am to my alluvials. I want to collect them all so I can evolve them and maybe evolve a couple of them, get 3 or 4 axolotls so I can chuck them all on a board. That'd be really, really fun. So the only concern I see with this is that once I finish collecting all the alluvials, I think it's going to feel a little bit empty. And I think the Ascendant mode for ranked PvP is going to aid to this because you don't even need to get every stage 3 alluvial. I could pretty much get all of my stage 1 alluvials on day 1. Obviously, it's not going to be the same in the open beta when the game comes out. But if the rarities are even remotely close, then we're in a bit of trouble because you can essentially build your ranked PvP mode in a day, which would be really, really bad. So just making sure that it's engaging for you to capture all the alluvials, that the stats really, really mean something. Leveling up the alluvials is really interesting. I think leveling is going to add a whole other element to this game that I'll have to make a whole new video, but I won't do that for now. I hope you guys have enjoyed my review. Overall, I think survival mode is excellent, right? It's got really deep gameplay. It's all very cinematic feeling. They just need to add the rest of the alluvials in there, and we'll make another video all about this. And the overworld, graphically, movement, jankiness, all that is pretty much spot on. The gameplay loop is there. The gameplay loop is very solid, especially that feeling when you're trying to capture that Furiox or Fury or whatever, and then you're successful and you can't help but be like, yes, today wasn't wasted. And that's a really, really good feature of the Illuvium gameplay loop and something they need to maintain as long as they can because it's going to be really important for the future success of Illuvium. But obviously, Crimson Waste doesn't quite feel, it feels really diverse, it feels really sparse, it feels a little bit lonely, but I know that Aaron's got a lot of things in the pipeline, so I'm excited to see what is coming and what is in store for the Illuvium overworld. So please don't forget to like and subscribe if you really like this video. Leave your comments down below. What is the thing you like the most about the overworld? And what is the thing that leaves a little bit to be desired? Okay, please leave a comment down below before you head off. Have a good day, guys. I've got lots more coming. Don't forget to subscribe.